Hello, welcome. My name is Professor Benny Gruen. I am currently a member, an adjunct faculty member of Touro University Worldwide. I teach classes in the Bachelor's of Psychology program and more so in the Bachelor's of Social Work program. And in this video, I would like to cover the very famous work and ideas of Jean Piaget. He has 4 stages of cognitive development, very famous. Nearly everybody comes across them in college. Social workers for sure come across it. It's a very important topic. And many students find that it's difficult to remember some of his ideas. So I'm going to present them, explain a little bit, what the ideas are. And I'm also going to introduce and share some mnemonics. Mnemonics are memory techniques that I created to help me remember, the stages. And I hope that will work for you, just as much as they work for me. Without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and jump into the presentation. Okay. All righty. Pulling up. PowerPoint, right? We're going to study Jean Piaget, his theory of cognitive development. I bring the link for Touro University Worldwide. It's a college that's 100% online. They offer some really, really great degrees. I'm an alumnus myself of the school. I did my dissertation there, so I hold it very much. Definitely worth checking out, if you are looking for an online degree or if you're looking to enhance your education and knowledge. Okay, let's jump into Jean Piaget. So here's a very famous picture of Jean Piaget. You can see he's quite old already in this picture. Who was he? He was a psychologist in Switzerland. Born in 1896, died in 1980, so he lived 84 years, decently long life. And he's very famous for developing his theory of cognitive development. And we'll get more into that, as we go along. Before we dive more into the content of his ideas, it's important always, especially when you learn psychology, to always ask yourself, why are we studying this particular idea? Right? Let's say, for example, now we're studying Jean Piaget. Who cares? Why are we studying Jean Piaget's ideas? Does it make a difference to me? What's the practical use? So there are a couple of different reasons. I'm going to focus on one of them. Jean Piaget's theory is going to talk about different stages of a child's development. Now, when we try to prepare different material for educational purposes to try to teach the children, we want to design the material in a way that the child will be able to understand it. We don't want to teach a 6-year-old advanced mathematical equations. Okay, yeah, there are some 6-year-olds that may be able to do that math, but for the most part, children in that stage of development are unable to solve complicated math equations. We want to tailor our education to the specific and appropriate level. We want to know what to expect of children who are within a given level. This helps us see if a particular child is within the normal range, or if maybe the child needs a little bit of extra support. And a lot of this information comes from understanding child development. And thanks to Jean Piaget, he kind of opened the door to understanding the different stages of cognitive development. Okay, so before we get involved in the actual stages of cognitive development, there's 3 important terms that Jean Piaget talks about. The first one is schema. It's not clear that Jean Piaget created the term schema. It may have been around a little bit before, but regardless, it certainly became famous through Jean Piaget. And the way I like to explain a schema is kind of like a file cabinet. Anything that belongs in this particular file cabinet will be placed in that, in that file or in that area. So, for example, I have a schema. I know what it's like to go into a restaurant and order food. So I might go into a fancy restaurant and sit down and order from the waiter. I might walk into a pizza shop and wait online and order at the counter. These are different experiences, but they're similar. They're very close, and therefore they go in the same file. So this is my restaurant schema. It's my framework. I know what to expect from a restaurant. Assimilation is when I come across something that's similar but a little bit different. It's not exact, but it's very, very close, and it still fits into the same file cabinet. So I'll just give an example. Perhaps if I walk into a bar and there's some people who are rowdy and loud discussions, and there's actually not that much food there, plenty of drinks going around, that's not what I would have expected from my original schema of restaurants, but it's close enough. It assimilates in, it gets into my file. So my file kind of is able to swallow up this visit to the bar. And now I have restaurants, fancy restaurants, pizza stores, pizzerias, and I also have bars. They all fit into the same schema. But sometimes the schema is unable to swallow up and absorb the new information. The way I like to refer to accommodation, I like to say an accommodation is a failed assimilation. It failed. My mind, my schema tried to absorb this new information, but it did not succeed. So let's give a quick example. Sticking to our restaurant schema, suppose I'm walking down the street and I see a nice building with all kinds of pictures of food on the outside. And I'm like, hey, a new restaurant. I go inside, but it's actually not a restaurant. It's a cooking school. And I see the cooking class. They invite me in. Sure, come and join. That experience is not the same at all to the experience of going to a restaurant, pizzeria, or bar. That experience cannot assimilate or fit into my existing schema. So I have to make an accommodation. I have to change my schema. Oh, not every place that has pictures of food on the outside and looks like a restaurant is actually a restaurant. In this particular scenario that I gave you, I might create a new schema. Okay, we have a schema for restaurants and we have a schema perhaps of cooking schools, but it's certainly not going to be in the same filing cabinet. It's not the same type of idea. So again, these are three important terms: schema, assimilation, and accommodation. I'll give one more example. This is quite a famous example. It's quite common. You've probably experienced it yourself. If you ever see a young child who's first learning about animals, so the child might realize that, hey, a four-legged animal is a dog. But then the child comes across a four-legged animal, a cat, and the child says, hey, look, it's a dog. And the father, mother, guardian, whoever's there says, no, that's not a dog. That's a cat. So what happened? The child had a schema. Four-legged animals are dogs. The child now sees a cat. The child tried to assimilate this new type of four-legged animal into his schema for dogs. He tried. Father, mother, guardian, told him not to, gave him new information. So now the child, right? The child had tried to assimilate the information. It failed, right? The parent or guardian stopped it. So instead, the child makes an accommodation. Oh, I have my schema for dogs. Some four-legged animals are dogs, but some four-legged animals are cats. So that's just another common example for schemas, assimilation, and accommodation. Okay, another famous idea. This is not from Piaget himself. This is from another famous psychologist, Frederick Bartlett. And he conducted an experiment. Today it's known as the War of the Ghost experiment back in 1932. What he did is he read to the participants of his study a story, a Native American story called the War of the Ghosts. And then he tested the participants to see how much of the story they remembered at different points in the future after they heard the story. And he had a couple of different observations. And we're going to focus on two of them because two of them relate very much to Piaget's ideas. Number one, some of the students forgot unfamiliar details. So in this specific story, the Native Americans went in a boat to go hunt seals. For many students, and this is the way Bartlett kind of explained his observation, they forgot the point that the Native Americans were hunting seals. Why? So Bartlett explains, he thinks the reason is because since hunting seals did not fit into the schemas or the life experiences of the participants, they weren't able to remember it as well. So he has this idea that people tend to forget unfamiliar details or they forget details that do not fit into your schemas. And another observation he had is that some of the participants remembered the Native Americans going in a boat, but they didn't remember that they were going to hunt seals. Instead, they remembered that the Native Americans were going fishing, which is significantly different than going to hunt seals. So he explained, he thinks the reason is because their mind took the unfamiliar point of going to hunt seals and made it familiar by changing it into going fishing. So in order for it to fit with their existing schema, their mind, their memory, their recall changed the information. It's a very interesting idea. Now, this is very important because this kind of shows us if we want a child or a learner to be able to remember material, we'll try to connect it or make it fit in with his existing schemas. Okay, now we move on to the 4 stages of cognitive development, what Jean Piaget is very, very famous for. And in this slide, we'll just quickly run through what the 4 stages are. Number 1 is sensory motor stage from 0 to 2. Number 2 are pre-operational stage, 2 to 7. Concrete operational stage, 7 to 11. Formal operation stage, 12 and up. Even adults above 12, anybody, we're always learning more, we're always developing. So we're kind of indefinitely in the formal operational stage. Now, I'm going to help you now remember because this might seem like a lot to remember, especially the random years, the ages, and the names. So as you move along, we are going to include the mnemonic. Now, before we do that, let me tell you one sentence, because this sentence is going to help us remember quite a bit. And the sentence is, Piaget went to 7-Eleven. Now, the 7-Eleven stores all over the place. So Piaget went to 7-Eleven. And we'll see how that sentence is important as we go along. Okay, so the first stage is the sensory motor stage. It's when a baby is just born until the baby is 2. It's called sensory motor because at this stage, the child can't really do much. The child is first learning to move around. The child is using its senses. It's putting things in its mouth. It's listening. It's touching, right? It's seeing. It's tasting. It's smelling. Everything it's doing, it's using its senses. And that's why it's called sensory, the senses, and motor, like a motorboat moves around, right? The child has motor. It's moving around. So sensory motor. And in our sentence, Piaget went to 7-Eleven. So Piaget went to, T-O, but we're going to use it to represent the year 2 years old, because from birth until 2 is the first stage. Now, like we said, during this stage, the infant is learning to use the senses and move around. Now, a very important thing that Piaget found is that during this stage, children develop object permanence. A very interesting idea. If I would go to a baby, and I actually have a daughter who's currently under 2 years old, and I actually saw her develop this over. And now she's over 1. I've seen her have object permanence for quite a while. Let me explain what it is. So if I show a little baby, let's say maybe 5-6 months, I show her a toy, and then she's interested in it. Then I take it and hide it and put it under a blanket or under a towel, and it's out of view. The child doesn't look for it. The child instead focuses on something else. So Piaget suggested that that's probably because, from the child's perspective, if an item's out of view, it's gone. But as my daughter got older, I would take the same item and put it in my pocket, and she would actually go after my pocket and stick her hand in and take it out, because she had object permanence. She knew that even though the item wasn't in view anymore, but it still existed. It was still there. And Piaget, famously said, perhaps the reason why children love the game of peekaboo, so much when they, close their eyes. Right? Why do children love that so much? Because in their perspective, when they can't see the mother covers her eyes. They think the mother is gone. And when the mother goes, "Oh, I'm really here," the baby thinks like it's some kind of magical reappearance, and that maybe is what's so amusing for babies. But again, as they get older, definitely by the time they're 2, and really a lot earlier, they develop this object permanence. Okay, the next stage is pre-operational. Now, the term operational in Piaget's theory means able to do complicated things. So we're now in the pre-operational stage. They're not really able to do such complicated things. They're very egocentric. They have a lot of magical thinking. Maybe if you watch the Arthur show on PBS Kids, remember DW, I believe she's 4 years old in the show, and she has a make-believe friend, Nadine, right? They have a lot of magical thinking during this stage. They develop language, right? So these are important developments. Like you see any child between the ages of 2 and 7, you see them mature, and sometimes they're pretty cute, and they say some pretty cute things. And this is the pre-operational stage because they're not yet able to do complicated things. Now, going back to our sentence, Piaget went to, right, that's the first stage, from 0 to 2, went to 7-Eleven. So 2 to 7 is the next stage. That is the pre-operational stage. Okay, the next stage, this is my favorite one, the third stage. Back when Gemini and I first started being able to produce pictures, I asked it to make me a picture of someone who looks like Jean Piaget sitting on concrete bricks in a 7-Eleven. And this is what it made for me. And you can actually look at the real picture of Jean Piaget in the top right, and you can see the resemblance is not bad. I think Gemini did a pretty decent job. Now, the reason why I asked it to make this picture is because this is the stage, concrete. Piaget is sitting on the concrete bricks, and he's sitting in a 7-Eleven because this stage is from 7 to 11. Now, I asked Gemini also to give him a cup of coffee. Why? Because Piaget had this idea that during this concrete operational stage, children develop what's called conservation. Now, conservation is a very important idea. If I have an ounce of liquid in a thick cup, it'll only fill up half the cup. If I have a very thin and tall cup, I pour that liquid in, it might fill up higher. So the water level might be higher, but there's the same amount of liquid in both. A child who's in the previous stage, the pre-operational stage, they won't realize. They'll think, if you ask them which one holds more, they'll generally point to the thinner and taller cup. Because in their mind, when you ask them which has more, you might be asking which one is higher. Maybe they don't understand the question. Maybe they don't understand the ideas. But there's something about children at that stage that they tend to pick the taller and narrower cup. Similarly, if I have 2 rows of 5 pennies each, and one row has 5 pennies close together, another row has 5 pennies spread apart, and I ask the child which one has more pennies, which one has more, they'll tend to pick the one that's spread out. even though both rows have the exact same amount of pennies, because they seem to associate the fact that one row is longer with more. In this stage, children start developing the idea that no, just because one looks longer or looks taller doesn't mean there's actually more here. It's the same 1 ounce, let's say, of liquid in both, or the same 5 pennies in both rows. And the children begin to get this understanding. And that's why Jean Piaget is holding a cup of coffee, because he's realizing that even if I pour this cup of coffee into a different shaped cup, it's the same amount of coffee no matter what I do. So that's taking place in the concrete operational stage. The child's thinking is becoming more complex. And yeah, this is my favorite stage. I really like this picture that Jim and I made. Okay, remember our sentence? Piaget went to 7-11, right? So we got Piaget from 0 to 2, 2 to 7, 7 to 11. And finally, the fourth stage is 12 and up. That's called the formal operational stage. They are now formally using their mind, their brain's expanding, and they're ready to deal with very, very complex problems. Like you see here in some of the bullet points, they start developing more abstract and hypothetical thinking. They're able to reason and think about different possibilities. They have improved problem solving and planning skills. And this is why that around the age of 12, 13, 14, when children are entering high school, we see that the mathematics and some of the other subjects that they're learning become increasingly difficult, because as their brain develops, as the child develops, they're able to do more and more. And this is a stage that we as adults are probably still in. We're learning. The fact that you're watching this video shows that you're learning. We're always looking to expand our mind. So maybe our brain isn't physically developing anymore, but there's always more to learn. Live and learn. Every day we learn new things. We are in the formal operational stage. Okay. It's always worthwhile to mention a few critiques of Piaget. I listed here a couple of them. They're very similar ideas. Piaget is famous for basing some of his observations on his own 3 children. And today that probably wouldn't be considered scientifically sound. At that time, it was considered acceptable. But the idea is that maybe it was true for his family, or maybe his neighborhood, or his society, his country. Maybe people from a different culture will develop differently. So it's interesting that Piaget came up with his ideas without taking culture into account. Additionally, other researchers have found that his stages may not be true. The numbers may be a little bit off. Okay. Regardless, the ideas of Piaget are very important. The idea that there are different stages and children develop, go through these stages as their minds develop. And it's something like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. It's very important for educators to understand how a child develops and to tailor make their education and their materials for the children based on the specific stages. We want to challenge the children. We don't want to give them questions or assignments or teach them material that is like above their head or outside of their stage, because then they're not going to be able to understand it well. Okay, hope this is clear. Let's just go over quickly one more time the mnemonic. So Jean Piaget went to 7-11, right? From Jean Piaget, 0 to 2, sensory motor, when they start using their senses and moving around. Then 2 to 7, right? The next stage is the pre-operational. Before they're able to operate, before they're able to do anything major. And then they go from 7-11 to 7-11, right? Remember Piaget on the concrete operational, he's sitting on the concrete bricks, and he's learning about his cup of coffee, that if he pours it into a different cup, it's still the same amount, regardless of how it looks, right? The children pick up conservation. They understand that. And finally, after 11, from there on end, indefinitely, you're in the formal operational stage. That's it. You're good to go. You're from there on end. You're advancing. You're able to do complex material. That is the formal operational stage. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If the mnemonic works for you, or if you have any feedback, please put a comment down below, and hope you tune in for future videos. All the best.